He walked the same trail. Every Tuesday, until one question from his granddaughter changed everything. He walked the same trail every Tuesday for 12 years, and no one in his family ever asked him why. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. Henry lived on the edge of town in a small brick house with green shutters and a porch swing that creaked when the wind picked up. He was 74, widowed, retired from his job at the post office, a man of few words and fewer surprises. But every Tuesday, without fail, he laced up his boots, filled a small thermos with coffee, and drove 10 minutes to Millridge Trail. It didn't matter if it was raining or if snow had dusted the trees. He never missed it. Not once. He never brought his phone, never invited anyone, didn't post about it. It wasn't for attention. It was just something he did. Neighbors sometimes saw him loading his truck and waved. He'd nod and give a polite smile, but he never offered an explanation. His daughter Julie once asked if he ever got bored walking the same route over and over. He just said, "It's a good trail." And that was the end of it. Inside his house, his calendar had one thing written on every Tuesday: trail. No other details. No times. Just that. Most of the trail was quiet. A 5-mile loop through pines and tall grass, curving past a small creek and ending near an old stump that looked like it had been hit by lightning years ago. That was the spot where he always stopped. He'd sit on a flat rock nearby, pour himself a little coffee from the thermos, and just stay there. Not doing anything, just looking out. Some weeks, hikers passed by and gave him a quick nod, sometimes a jogger, but usually it was just him in the trees. And for Henry, that was enough. He liked the stillness, the predictability, the way the trail didn't ask anything of him. But there was something no one else knew. He hadn't started walking that trail until the year his wife Carol passed away. She'd been gone almost 13 years now. She was the one who found the trail. Back when they were younger, when they still held hands everywhere they went. She had read about it in a community magazine and convinced him to try it one weekend. He remembered how she packed a lunch and wore a sun hat that kept slipping off. They got lost halfway through. She laughed the entire time. After she died, he didn't know where to go. The house felt wrong. The mornings were too quiet. Everything had a hole in it. So one Tuesday he put on his boots, grabbed the old thermos she gave him one Christmas, and went back to the trail. Just to feel close to something. It helped. And so he went again, and again, until it became a part of him. He never told Julie, or the grandkids. It felt too private, too fragile. Some things, he figured, didn't need to be explained. The world kept moving. People came and went. But every Tuesday Henry walked. Same start time, same pace, same stops. And no one ever questioned it. Until one day, someone did. And it changed everything. Emma always had questions. She was 9, curious, and never satisfied with simple answers. If you told her the sky was blue, she wanted to know why. If you said something was just the way it is, she'd tilt her head and ask, "But who decided that?" Henry loved that about her. She reminded him of Carol in that way, always thinking, always wondering. Every other weekend, Julie would drop Emma off at his house, sometimes for the afternoon, sometimes overnight. They'd bake cookies, feed the birds in the backyard, or sit quietly while Emma drew pictures at the kitchen table. She liked being there. The stillness didn't bother her the way it did other kids. One Tuesday morning, out of routine, Henry packed his thermos and headed toward the door, same as he always did. Emma happened to be staying over that day. She was still in her pajamas, cross-legged on the living room rug, coloring a picture of a fox in the woods. "Where are you going?" she asked, without looking up. "Out for a walk," he said simply, pulling on his boots. "Where?" He paused for a second. No one had asked that in years. "Millridge Trail," he replied. She put down her pencil. "Can I come?" Henry blinked. He had never brought anyone on the walk. Not once. It was something he'd always done alone. The idea of sharing it felt strange, almost like handing someone a page from a journal. "It's long," he said, "and there's not much to see." Emma shrugged. "I don't mind." He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but wear good shoes." 20 minutes later, they were walking side by side down the narrow dirt path. The morning was cool, with mist still clinging to the grass. Birds chirped above them, and small leaves fluttered down like quiet reminders that fall was near. Emma skipped ahead, stopping every few feet to point something out. "Look, a feather. There's a spiderweb on that branch. That rock looks like a turtle." Henry kept his pace steady. He wasn't used to stopping, but he didn't rush her. About a mile in, she dropped back beside him. "Do you always come here?" "Every Tuesday," he said. She nodded like she was filing the information away, then looked up. "Why Tuesday?" "No reason," he said. "Just started that way." Emma didn't ask more. Not yet. She just walked quietly next to him for the next stretch. When they reached the old stump, Henry did what he always did. He sat on the flat rock, unscrewed the lid of the thermos, and poured himself a little coffee. Emma stood nearby, hands in the pockets of her hoodie. "You sit here every time?" "Yep." "What do you do?" He shrugged. "Just think." Emma looked around, then sat cross-legged on the ground across from him. She didn't speak for a minute. Then she picked up a small stick and started drawing shapes in the dirt. Henry watched her quietly. He had never thought of this place as a spot for conversation. It had always been about remembering, about silence. But having her there didn't take anything away from that. It added to it. When they got home later that morning, Emma went straight back to her coloring book. No big talk, no questions, just picked up her pencil and kept going. But Henry felt something different. Like maybe the trail didn't have to stay frozen in the past. Like maybe it was ready for something new. He didn't know it yet, but Emma was only just beginning to ask the questions that would change everything he thought he knew about that walk. The second time Emma asked to come along, Henry didn't hesitate. He had expected that first walk to be a one-time thing, a curious kid tagging along out of boredom. But the next Tuesday morning, before he even reached for his boots, Emma was already standing at the door in her sneakers, water bottle in hand. "You said I could come again," she said. He nodded. "All right, let's go." They didn't talk much on the drive. She hummed a little to herself, looking out the window as the trees rushed past. Henry kept one hand on the wheel, glancing at her now and then. She looked comfortable, like she belonged. The trailhead was quiet, same as always. A thin breeze moved through the pines, and a layer of damp leaves crunched under their feet as they started in. This time, Emma didn't skip ahead. She stayed close to him, walking just behind, stopping every so often to examine something. A mossy stone, a crooked tree branch. She didn't ask as many questions this time. She was watching. About 20 minutes in, she tugged gently on his sleeve. "Do you ever get sad here?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. He didn't answer right away. "I used to," he said finally. "Not as much now." Emma nodded like that made perfect sense. She didn't press him. When they reached the old stump again, she didn't wait for him to sit. She found a spot beside him, crossed her legs, and started digging into her small backpack. "I brought something," she said. She pulled out a notebook and a pencil. "What's that for?" he asked. "I thought I'd write stuff down. Things I notice, like the way the trees sound or the smell of the dirt. Just whatever feels important." Henry raised an eyebrow. "You think the smell of dirt is important?" Emma smiled. "I think you do." He let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. She had a way of cutting right to the center of things without even trying. She wrote for a while. Not non-stop, just a few lines at a time. Then she'd pause, look around, and write something else. Henry sat beside her, sipping his coffee, not saying much. But he found himself glancing at her page now and then. She wasn't just writing facts. She was paying attention. At one point, she looked up and asked, "What's your favorite part of the trail?" He thought about it. "This spot," he said. "Right here." "Why?" He didn't answer right away. "It just feels right," he said. Emma looked at the stump, then at the flat rock he always sat on, then back at him. "I think you miss her here," she said quietly. Henry felt his chest tighten, but he didn't show it. He nodded. "Yeah, I do." They didn't talk much after that, but they didn't need to. When they got back to the car, Emma handed him the notebook. "For you," she said. He opened to the first page. In neat, careful handwriting, she'd written, "Tuesday Trail, walk number 2. Leaves smelled like tea today. Birds made a rhythm, kind of like tapping on a desk. Grandpa walked a little slower than last time. There's something kind in the trees if you're quiet enough to hear it." Henry didn't say anything. He just closed the notebook, placed it gently on the dashboard, and looked out toward the trees one more time before driving home. For the first time in 12 years, he wasn't walking the trail alone. And for reasons he didn't quite understand yet, that small change was starting to matter more than he expected. The third Tuesday felt different the moment they stepped onto the trail. The air was warmer, but not in a way that made you sweat. It just felt lighter. Henry noticed it, though he didn't say anything out loud. Emma did. "It smells like green," she said, stretching her arms as they walked. He glanced over at her. "What does green smell like?" She shrugged. "Alive?" He didn't have an answer to that, but he understood it anyway. They walked the first mile in silence. Emma had her notebook again, and this time she wore a little backpack she had decorated with stickers, stars, pine trees, a fox with glasses. Every so often she'd stop to jot something down or snap a photo on a small disposable camera her mom had given her for fun. Henry kept his pace steady, like always, but he didn't mind the pauses anymore. In fact, he found himself slowing down on purpose. They stopped near the creek, the one that ran low most of the year but still made enough sound to remind you it was there. Emma crouched down and dipped her fingers in. "It's cold," she said. "It always is," he replied. She turned back and looked at him. "Do you know how many times you've walked this trail?" He thought for a moment. "Over 600, probably." Her eyes widened. "That's crazy." He smiled. "Yeah, I guess it is." They kept walking. Leaves rustled overhead. Birds flitted between branches. A squirrel darted across the path, causing Emma to stop mid-step. "He scared me," she said, laughing. "You scared him first," Henry replied. When they reached the stump, she didn't ask what it was or why he always stopped there. She just sat down on the ground beside it and started unpacking her bag. Today she had brought a small jar with a lid. "What's that for?" he asked. "Trail treasures," she said. "Like what?" "Things that matter but aren't fancy. A leaf that looks like fire. A pebble that's shaped weird. You'll see." Henry chuckled. "All right then." She handed him the jar and motioned toward the woods. "If you see something worth keeping, it goes in here." He looked at it, then looked out into the trees. For years, this place had been about one thing for him, remembering Carol, holding on to the past. But now, with Emma beside him, it was starting to feel like something else. They stayed there longer than usual. Emma wandered a bit, picking up a few small things and dropping them into the jar. A curled piece of bark, a smooth stone, a tiny feather. She held each one like it was valuable. Henry sipped his coffee and watched her, the way she moved so gently through the space. When they were ready to leave, Emma handed him the jar. "Keep it," she said. "It's our first collection." He took it, looked down at the contents, and nodded. "Thanks, kid." On the drive home, she talked more than usual. About school, about a book she was reading, about a weird dream she had where a bear worked at a gas station. Henry mostly listened, nodding now and then. But his mind was still back on the trail. Not just on the jar, or the stump, but on the fact that, for the first time in years, the walk wasn't about what he had lost. It was about what he was still holding on to, and though he didn't say it out loud, he knew something was shifting. The trail hadn't changed, but maybe he had. It was on their fourth walk that Emma asked the question he hadn't seen coming. They were about halfway through the trail, past the creek and the narrow bend where the trees grew close together. Henry had just stepped over a fallen log when he noticed Emma wasn't right behind him. He turned. She was standing still, staring up at one of the taller trees with her hands tucked into the front pocket of her hoodie. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, then looked back at him with a question already forming behind her eyes. "Why do you come here every Tuesday?" Her voice wasn't loud. She didn't say it like she was trying to start something. It was gentle, curious. Just a girl asking her grandfather something she'd been wondering for a while. He didn't answer right away. He hadn't told anyone the real reason. Not Julie, not his friends, not even himself, really. "I just like the quiet," he said at first. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it wasn't enough. Emma didn't press him. She just looked at him a moment longer and started walking again. But the question stayed with him. When they reached the stump, he sat like usual. Emma sat next to him, took out her notebook, and started writing without a word. Henry stared out at the trees, coffee in hand, but the peacefulness that usually filled that space wasn't there. Not like before. He thought about how many times he'd come to this exact spot. 12 years. Every Tuesday. And it all started the week after Carol died. It had been sudden. A heart attack in the middle of the night. One moment she was reading a book on the couch. The next, she was gone. The funeral happened in a blur. People came by, dropped off casseroles, said kind things in low voices. Then they left. And then the silence came. He remembered walking into the kitchen that first Tuesday morning, standing there without knowing what to do. Then he saw the old hiking boots by the door. Hers and his, lined up side by side like always. So he put his on and went to the trail. Not because he wanted to be outdoors, not because he needed the exercise, but because it was the only place that still felt like it belonged to both of them. And that became the pattern. Every week, same walk, same place, same quiet. It wasn't something he talked about. Grief never asked for attention. It just sat quietly inside you until something stirred it. And now, here it was, stirred by a simple question from a child who didn't even realize the weight of what she'd asked. He looked over at Emma. She was drawing a picture in the corner of her notebook. It looked like a tree, but with a heart carved into the trunk. "You asked me why I come here," he said finally. She stopped drawing and looked up. "I come because this was where your grandma and I used to walk, a long time ago, before you were born." Emma's expression didn't change. She didn't look shocked or confused. She just listened. When she passed, he continued, I didn't know what to do. So I came here. I guess I kept coming, because it was the only place that still felt like her. Emma didn't say anything right away. She looked down at her drawing, then closed her notebook slowly. I think she'd like that you still come, she said. Henry nodded. Yeah, I hope so. The wind moved through the trees just then. Not loud, just enough to make the leaves shift above them. They sat a while longer in silence. This time it wasn't heavy. It was understood. Something had been said that needed saying. Something Henry hadn't even realized he'd been carrying for years. All it took was one question to bring it to the surface. And now, it didn't feel so heavy anymore. The next Tuesday came faster than Henry expected. For years, those days had crept up slowly, spaced by routine and silence. But now, for the first time in a long time, he found himself looking forward to the walk. Not just going through the motions, not just showing up because he didn't know how to stop. He looked forward to Emma. She was ready when he got downstairs that morning. Hair tied back, backpack zipped, sneakers on. Like it was her tradition now, too. As they drove, she talked about school, about a group project she didn't want to do, and a song stuck in her head that she promised she'd stop singing, then didn't. Henry just listened, smiling to himself as the trail came into view. They started walking, and right away he noticed something had shifted. Emma still stopped to pick things up or scribble notes in her book, but she wasn't treating the trail like an adventure anymore. She was treating it like something more familiar, a place that belonged to both of them. She walked slower, more in sync with his pace. At one point she reached out and held his hand without saying a word. It startled him, not because it was unusual, but because it had been so long since someone did that. For a brief moment, he felt Carol again. Not in a dramatic way, not like some memory flashing across his mind. Just warmth. They reached the creek and paused, as usual. Emma crouched beside the water and let her fingers trail just above the surface. Then she looked up. What's something you never told Grandma? He blinked. What do you mean? Emma shrugged. Like, something you wanted to say but didn't. Henry stared at the water. That wasn't a question he could answer quickly. He sat on a nearby rock and thought. I never told her how scared I was when she got sick that first time, he said. She made me promise not to treat her differently, so I acted like I wasn't worried. But I was. Emma nodded slowly, as if she understood more than a 9-year-old should. She probably knew anyway, she said. Yeah, Henry said, smiling faintly. She usually did. They kept walking. Near the stump, Emma pulled something new out of her bag, a small plastic camera, the kind that clicks when you wind it. I'm taking trail portraits, she said. He laughed. Portraits? Of what? Not who. What? Like this rock, and that tree with the split in the trunk. Stuff that's always here, even if people don't notice. She snapped a photo of a bent tree root, then another of the stump, then one of Henry, sitting in his usual spot, thermos in hand. Don't smile, she said. Just look like you always do. He shook his head but didn't protest. After a while they sat quietly, Emma writing, Henry sipping his coffee. The breeze moved around them again, soft and cool. For the first time, Henry didn't think only of the past while sitting there. He thought of now, of this moment, of how somehow this little girl had taken something that had belonged to his grief and turned it into something else. Not lighter, not smaller, just more shared. As they packed up to leave, Emma handed him the notebook. She had written one line near the bottom of the page. Today it didn't feel like remembering. It felt like living. Henry read it once, then folded the notebook closed. He didn't say a word on the walk back. But something in him had shifted again. The trail was the same. The path hadn't changed. But what it meant, what it gave back, was becoming something he hadn't expected. And he was starting to welcome it. By the 7th Tuesday, the trail didn't feel like a routine anymore. It felt like a tradition. Henry still woke up early, still packed his thermos the same way, still wore the same faded jacket with the loose button on the left sleeve. But now, before he did any of that, he checked if Emma was awake. And she always was. This time, she came downstairs with 2 mason jars in her hands. "I made trail mix," she said. "One for you, one for me." He took the jar and gave it a small shake. It was filled with pretzels, peanuts, a few raisins, and bright red M&Ms. "You put the candy in just mine, right?" he asked. She grinned. "Nice try." On the way to the trail, they passed a few early joggers and a man walking a dog. Henry gave them a nod, like always. But Emma waved. Not a shy wave. A full, confident wave, like she already knew the trail and everyone on it. She belonged there now. Once they reached the first clearing, Henry stopped walking. He looked out across the trees, hands in his pockets. Emma came up beside him. "What?" He shook his head. "Just realizing I never noticed how far you can see from here." She looked too. "It's because you were always looking down at the path." He chuckled. "That's probably true." They kept walking. She pointed out things he'd walked past for years without noticing. A cluster of mushrooms at the base of a tree. A branch shaped like a question mark. A patch of clover so dense it looked like a tiny forest. Near the creek, she asked if they could stop early. "Why here?" he asked. "I want to draw the water," she said. "It looks different when it moves." So they sat. She pulled out her notebook, now thick with folded pages and tucked-in leaves. Henry poured his coffee and leaned back on his elbows, watching the sky through the trees. And he started to realize something. The trail had stopped being about the past. It wasn't only where he came to remember Carol anymore. It had become where he watched his granddaughter grow, right there on the same dirt path. He thought about all the years he had spent walking it alone, trying to hold on to memories that slipped a little further away each season. And now here Emma was, leaving behind new ones, right in front of him. After a while, she showed him her drawing. It wasn't perfect. The lines were wobbly, the shading uneven, but she had written something beneath it that made him pause. "The creek never stops moving, but it still finds a way to be quiet." He didn't know what to say. He just looked at her, then back at the page. They sat like that for a while longer, and then Emma said something that stuck with him. "I like walking with you. It feels like the trail knows we're here." Henry thought about that the whole way back. Not in a magical sense, not like the trees were watching, but in the way that something quiet starts to feel familiar over time, in the way a path forms deeper the more feet pass over it. When they reached the parking lot, Emma turned to him. "We should make a map of the trail, not the whole thing, just the important parts, the ones that matter to us." He smiled. "That sounds like a good idea." That night, at the kitchen table, they started sketching. The stump, the rock by the creek, the question mark branch, and one blank space marked with a simple label, "To be discovered." Henry looked at it, then looked at her. He had spent so many years thinking the trail was a place to remember what he lost. Now, it was a place where something new was growing, and that made all the difference. The next Tuesday started with rain. Not a storm, not thunder, just a steady, quiet drizzle that made the windows blur and the streets shine. Henry assumed they'd skip the walk. He figured Emma would sleep in or decide to stay dry and warm, like any kid might. But at 7:45 sharp, she came downstairs in a raincoat, boots already zipped. "You coming?" she asked. He raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "I want to see what the trail looks like in the rain," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. So they went. The trail was softer than usual. The dirt darkened and the leaves slick underfoot. Drops of water clung to every surface. Twigs, stones, even the threads of spider webs stretched between low branches. Emma stopped almost immediately to pull her camera from her coat pocket. "I'm starting a rain collection," she said. Henry laughed. "A what?" "Photos of things in the rain. Not the rain itself, just how it changes stuff." She snapped a photo of a fern with beads of water along its edge. Then one of Henry's boots, muddy and firm in the trail. Then a close-up of a tree trunk where the bark looked darker and somehow older. The forest was quieter today. Fewer people, fewer birds. But the stillness didn't feel empty. It felt full. Everything seemed closer, more detailed, like the rain had peeled away a layer people normally missed. As they walked, Emma reached into her bag and pulled out the trail map they had started the week before. She had added color to it, green for trees, blue for the creek, little drawings in the corners. She held it up under her coat to keep it dry. "We should name that crooked tree we always pass," she said. "The one with the hollow in it?" "Yeah, it looks like it's leaning in to listen. What if we call it the listening tree?" Henry nodded. "Sounds about right." A few minutes later, they reached the stump. This time, they didn't sit. The ground was too wet. So they stood side by side, looking out at the familiar view through a misty screen of rain. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Grandma would have liked today." Henry looked over at her. "She liked the rain," Emma said. "Mom told me once that she used to open all the windows during storms just to hear it." He smiled faintly. "She did." "She probably would have liked this walk too," Emma added. Henry nodded. "She's the reason I started it." Emma turned to him. "And I'm the reason you kept going?" He didn't say anything right away. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "Yeah, you are." They didn't need to say more than that. The rain slowed as they made their way back, and patches of light started to break through the trees. Everything looked a little brighter, a little cleaner. When they reached the car, Emma pulled a folded sheet of paper from her pocket. It was another drawing. This one showed two figures walking down a trail, one tall, one small, with a crooked tree in the background. A few simple raindrops drawn above them, like quiet music falling from the sky. At the bottom she'd written, "Some walks are quiet. Some are even quieter. But the best ones are never lonely." Henry folded the drawing and tucked it into the glove compartment. He didn't need to say thank you. She already knew. And as they drove home, windshield wipers ticking in a slow, steady rhythm, he realized the trail wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a bond, a living, breathing thing. And it was still growing. It was Emma's idea to build the bench. They were sitting at the kitchen table one evening, a week after their rainy walk. She had just finished coloring a new section of their trail map. This one had tiny mushrooms and a sketch of the listening tree. "We should leave something on the trail," she said. "Something that stays, even when we're not there." Henry looked up from his coffee. "Like what?" "A bench," she said. "For other people to sit. Maybe they'll stop where we stop. And maybe they'll think about someone they miss too." He didn't answer right away. The idea surprised him. Not because it was big, but because it made sense. For years, the trail had been his place. Then it became theirs. Now she was talking about opening it up to others. He nodded slowly. All right, let's do it. The next few days were filled with planning. Emma measured out sketches. Henry talked to a friend who knew woodworking. They picked a spot just past the stump, where the trees opened into a little clearing and the sun hit right in the morning. Emma chose the message for the plaque. She wrote it out carefully in pencil, sliding the paper across the table so Henry could read it. For those who ask and those who answer. He read it twice, said nothing, then gave her a quiet smile and nodded. 2 weeks later, they carried the bench pieces into the woods. It was slow work. Henry had to rest more than he used to, and Emma kept getting distracted by interesting rocks. But eventually, it came together. Simple, sturdy, facing the trees. The small brass plaque caught the light when the sun came through the branches. When they were finished, they didn't talk much. They just sat. Henry poured 2 cups of coffee from his thermos, one for him, one mostly milk and sugar for her. And in that moment, it felt complete. Not the trail, not the bench, the journey, the thing he hadn't realized he'd been on since Carol died. The quiet ache that had brought him back to this place, again and again, for years. It hadn't ended. It had just changed. It became a trail he no longer walked alone. A trail filled with small questions, big answers, and the kind of silence that heals instead of hurts. Emma swung her legs over the edge of the bench, looking out like she was trying to memorize the view. "You think people will use it?" she asked. "Maybe," Henry said. "But even if they don't, we did." She nodded. "That counts." They stayed a little longer than usual that morning. No rush, no routine, just 2 people on a trail, with a story they now shared. On the way back to the car, Emma picked up a small stone and placed it in the empty jar she kept clipped to her bag. She didn't label it. She didn't need to. Some memories don't need names to last. Henry looked back one more time before they turned the bend, and the bench disappeared from view. He felt something settle in his chest. Not heavy, not sharp, just full. The kind of full that tells you you're exactly where you need to be. The trail hadn't changed much over the years, but what it meant had changed completely. And now, it would be there, quiet, steady, waiting for anyone who needed it next. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.